The rain fell endlessly over old Highway 17, as if the sky itself had grown tired of watching so much loneliness. The headlights of an old pickup truck cut through the fog, and inside, an elderly man and woman looked toward the horizon with the eyes of those who have lost their way and their faith. The fuel was running out. The cold crept through the cracks, and the clock marked an hour that no longer belonged to anyone. When they saw the rusty sign of a roadside bar with a group of motorcycles parked outside, the old man whispered, "Maybe we can spend the night here." They didn't know that what would happen next would move the entire town. Stay until the end, because this story proves that brotherhood can be stronger than fear. The name of that man was Arthur Hale, and the woman beside him, Margaret, had been his life companion for almost half a century. Together they had watched time pass like a long, worn road beneath their feet, full of memories, losses, and silences that no longer needed words. Everything they had once owned, a modest home, a garden that smelled of spring, the laughter of their children when the world was still young, had been left behind, erased by the slow and cruel tide of fate. All that remained were the two of them, an old vehicle that gasped with every mile, and a hope, faint but stubborn, to find a place where the cold didn't hurt so much. They traveled without a map, like souls that had stopped searching for a destination and only wished to rest even for one night in some corner where life might not feel so cruel. The road was deserted, wrapped in a fog that seemed to swallow the sound of the engine, until a flickering light made them stop. It was a rusty sign half bent by the wind. Iron Mercy. A name that, without knowing it, would mark the rest of their days. Arthur parked the truck in front of the place. From inside came echoes of old music, the growl of idle engines, and the deep laughter of men who seemed made of steel and gasoline. Margaret looked at him with a mixture of fear and resignation. "Maybe we can get something warm to drink," she whispered, clutching her worn coat. When they opened the door, the sound of the hinge was like a gunshot in the dark. The air filled with smoke, beer, and curiosity. The noise stopped instantly. Dozens of eyes turned towards them, hard, suspicious, marked by shadows and scars. Black leather jackets reflected the neon lights, and on their patches was written a name that inspired both fear and respect: Hell's Angels. Arthur felt his heart pounding like an old drum, but still he walked to the bar with the dignity of a man who has lost everything except his pride. "Good evening," he said, his voice tired but steady. "We just wanted a cup of coffee and, if possible, a corner to sleep for a couple of hours." The bartender, a broad man with kind eyes, looked at them with something close to compassion. He was about to reply, but before the words could leave his mouth, a deep voice thundered from the back of the room, heavy with authority. "No one sleeps for free here, old man." Silence returned, thick as the smoke that floated between the lights. Margaret lowered her head. Arthur pressed his lips together, and for an instant time seemed to stop. No one yet knew that this phrase would mark the beginning of a story the town would remember for generations. Because that night, amid noise, cold, and sleeping engines, something much greater than fear had begun to awaken. The air inside the bar had become thick, almost tangible, as if each breath weighed more than the last. The lights flickered a dull yellow, and the cigarette smoke rose slowly, wrapping the room in a haze that seemed to halt time itself. Margaret, her hands trembling, reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a wrinkled bill, damp from rain and fear. She placed it on the counter with a gesture of apology, knowing it was the last of what they had. The man who had spoken from the back, a huge biker, tattooed up to his neck, his eyes cold as steel, stood slowly. His boots thudded against the wooden floor, and without breaking eye contact with Arthur, he pushed the bill back with a ring-covered finger. "We don't want your money," he said with disdain. "Trust can't be bought here." Arthur held his gaze for a moment, and though fatigue marked his face, there was no fear in his eyes, only a deep, serene sadness, the kind carried by those who have already lost too much to be afraid of anything more. "Then we'll just have the coffee," he murmured softly, but firmly, "and we'll leave at dawn." The words lingered between the smoke and the distant hum of the jukebox, like a prayer no one dared to break. Some men chuckled quietly. Others exchanged glances filled with curiosity and restraint. But at a dimly lit table in the corner, someone watched in silence. It was Cole Maddox, the leader of the group, a man with a gray beard, weathered face, and tired eyes, the kind that had seen too many wars in places where justice was nothing but an empty word. The scars on his hands told stories no one wanted to hear, and on his chest the club's patch gleamed under the neon light like a reminder of promises that could never be broken.
Cole watched how Margaret tried to hide a tremor, how Arthur feigned calm to protect her. Then he heard it. A dry, heavy cough, the sound of an illness that had been clinging to her for years. The veteran slowly set down his glass, letting the ice melt between his fingers, and rose to his feet. As soon as he did, the room went dead silent. No one spoke when Cole Maddox decided to. His voice, when it came, carried no threat, only a gravity that came from somewhere older than violence. "Let them stay," he said calmly, scanning each face one by one. "No one should be alone in this cold." The silence that followed was absolute. Some looked down, others shifted uneasily in their seats. Because in that world, among men who had learned to survive in the shadows, compassion was a dangerous word. Cole returned slowly to his seat. He lit a cigarette and exhaled the smoke with the serenity of someone who had already made a decision and knew it would have a cost. Around him, the looks exchanged, some approving, others doubtful. But deep down, they all knew the same truth. That simple, rare act of humanity would not go unnoticed. And that night, in the heart of the Iron Mercy, the fate of two old souls and an entire brotherhood became forever intertwined.
The night had grown thick, motionless, as if time itself had stopped inside the Iron Mercy. In the room at the back, Arthur and Margaret slept on an old bed beneath a blanket that smelled of dust and gasoline, unaware of the murmurs forming on the other side of the wall. Outside, the rain tapped the metal roof with a slow rhythm, and the faint hum of resting engines sounded like the snore of beasts waiting to awaken. At the bar, under flickering neon light, Cole Maddox sat in silence. His face was half hidden by shadow, a cigarette hanging from his lips, exhaling thin ribbons of smoke that dissolved into the air. In front of him, a few men whispered arguments, careful not to wake the others. "What are you doing, Cole?" one of them muttered, frowning. "We don't know those two. They could be anyone, could be lying." Another crossed his arms. "We're not saints. We don't need someone else's problems." Cole listened without lifting his eyes. He drew a slow drag, and the glow of the cigarette illuminated the scars across his face like maps of old battles. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, barely a whisper, but enough to quiet them all. "I know," he said, "but look at them. The world's already forgotten them, just like it forgot us." No one answered. The words hung in the air, heavy with a truth that hurt more than any wound. Outside, a thunder rumbled far away, and for a moment even the storm seemed to listen. Cole stood and walked to the window. He looked out at the darkness, the row of bikes glistening under the rain, the puddles shining like broken mirrors. His mind drifted to other nights, other faces, to the men he'd lost in war, and to the promise he'd made that if he ever came back alive, no one under his watch would face the cold alone.
Meanwhile, in the room behind him, Margaret stirred in her sleep. She whispered her son's name, the one who had gone to war and never returned. Arthur, half asleep, held her close, murmuring that everything would be fine, not knowing that just a few meters away, a plan was already taking shape. Cole crushed the cigarette against the counter and turned to his men. "At dawn, I want the engines ready," he said. "Find out what happened to that couple. If someone hurt them, we'll make it right." The men looked at one another. Some hesitated, others nodded silently. In their world, loyalty wasn't debated, it was proven. And so, amid the slumbering growl of Harleys and the smell of oil and rain, the Brotherhood sealed a new pact, one unwritten but deeply understood. Protecting the forgotten was another way of protecting themselves. The clock struck 3 a.m. No one spoke again. Only the brief ignition of a few engines broke the stillness, like a prayer made of steel and smoke.
Outside, the rain had begun to ease. Inside, the men of the Iron Mercy already knew what needed to be done. If you too believe loyalty still has meaning, subscribe to Hell's Road, because these stories are just beginning.
Dawn came slowly, tinting the wet asphalt and the sleeping bikes outside the Iron Mercy with gold. The silence of night broke with the first growl of a Harley, deep, steady, like the heartbeat of a waking beast. Cole Maddox was already up before the sun breached the horizon. He wasn't a man who slept much. The war had taught him daylight was for moving, acting before the world remembered how to stop you. The smell of coffee mixed with the scent of gasoline. Some men checked their chains, wiped fog from their headlights, or tightened bolts. Everything was done with the ritual precision of those who didn't need words to communicate. Their faces carried focus and something else, that tense calm that comes before the acts that truly matter. Cole stepped outside, his jacket slung over his shoulder. In his pocket was an old photograph, the one he'd seen hours earlier on Arthur's trailer table. A young boy in uniform, smiling with the innocence that only exists before war. Now he knew who he was, he knew what they'd lost, and he knew that pain like that couldn't be pitied, it had to be answered. Through a contact at a nearby gas station, they'd learned the truth. The night before, while Arthur and Margaret were asking for help, thieves had stolen their trailer and hauled it to a junkyard on the outskirts. They'd taken everything the couple owned, even the blanket that kept them warm.
Cole clenched his fists. It wasn't anger. It was something purer. A kind of internal compass, a justice that didn't need laws to find its direction. He slipped on his leather jacket, and the sound of the zipper sliding up echoed like a silent command. "They carry our emblem on their chest," he said hoarsely, eyes fixed on the horizon. "And that means if the world hurts them, the world hurts us." There were no cheers, no answers, only engines igniting one after another, like a row of hearts beating in unison. The roar filled the morning air, chasing away the last remnants of night. The road awaited, and they knew exactly where it led. They wore their colors like armor, symbols of loyalty stitched in leather. And you can carry that same spirit. The official Hell's Road gear is linked below, for those who live by the code, for those who still believe that brotherhood isn't bought, it's earned. Cole climbed onto his bike, adjusted his gloves, and cast one last glance toward the bar, where Margaret stood at the window, watching in silence. The wind lifted her hair, and for a moment, between the sunrise and the roar of engines, something changed in the air. They were no longer just bikers. They were guardians. And without another word, the engines thundered as one, shaking the earth beneath them. The convoy took off, leaving behind a trail of dust, promises, and steel. Once again, the road became witness to a justice Only they could understand.
The roar of the Harleys tore through the dawn like thunder over the valley. The convoy advanced down the rural roads, raising a cloud of dust that mingled with the rising heat from the asphalt. The sun, still weak, painted their helmets and leather jackets in copper tones, while the engine's hum blended into a single heartbeat, heavy, solemn, like a march to war. Cole led the line, eyes fixed ahead, saying nothing. He knew this wasn't vengeance, it was justice, his kind of justice, the kind not written in laws, but carved into the soul. At the edge of town, the junkyard appeared among dry weeds like a graveyard of iron. Piles of rusted scrap, broken tires, and the metallic whisper of wind created a desolate stage. And there, amid that abandonment, stood the Hale's trailer, caked in mud, ransacked, its doors gaping like a wound. Their belongings were scattered across the ground. An old blanket, a pair of shoes, some folded photographs, and a box of yellowed letters, spilled like fragments of a life someone had tried to erase. 3 men were waiting, young, hard-faced, eyes empty, the kind of arrogance that comes before the world teaches its lessons. They leaned against a battered van, laughing without reason, unaware of the storm closing in. Cole killed the engine and dismounted, slowly, deliberately, with the calm only men who have already watched hope die can possess. The silence that followed was heavier than any threat. Behind him, the others parked in a gleaming line. The growl of the Harley softened to a low, steady vibration, like held breath.
One of the thieves, the youngest, stepped forward, licking his lips to mask his nerves. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" he sneered. "Cops?" Cole met his eyes. His face remained calm, almost kind, but his voice carried the weight of judgment. "No," he said slowly, lighting a cigarette. Worse. The silence that followed was a verdict. The boy swallowed hard, and then the engines behind Cole roared again, a thunderous wave that filled the air. The 3 men exchanged terrified glances and ran. No one chased them. They didn't have to. The road itself would deal with them. Cole dropped his cigarette and knelt beside the trailer. Gently, he picked up one of the photographs. Arthur and Margaret, decades younger, smiling in front of their old home. He held it for a moment, then tucked it into his jacket. Behind him, the others moved in silence. One lifted the box of letters and wiped it clean. Another repaired the broken hinges. Someone else folded the clothing carefully, as if each piece were sacred. There was no violence, no shouting, no revenge, only a reverential silence, heavy and pure, floating between the muted roar of engines and the creak of old metal. They all understood. This wasn't just about returning what was stolen. It was about returning dignity. And in that forgotten junkyard, between the dust and rust, the Hells Angels became, for a brief moment, what the world rarely saw in them: guardians of honor, heirs to a code that spoke in the language of asphalt and heart. The sun rose fully, bathing the scene in gold. The engines roared once more, but this time, their sound carried no fear, only redemption.
By the time they returned, the morning was in full bloom. The air smelled of wet earth and fresh coffee, and the shadows of night retreated slowly as the convoy of Harleys rolled back toward the Iron Mercy, shining beneath the rising sun. It was a powerful sound, but not menacing, more like the echo of something ancient, the call of a brotherhood that had kept a promise no one had asked them to make. Arthur and Margaret woke with a start. For a moment, they couldn't tell if they were still dreaming or if the rumble outside was real. Margaret sat up slowly, heart racing, while Arthur pulled back the curtain with trembling hands. What he saw took his breath away. There, right in front of the bar, stood their trailer. But it wasn't the same one they'd lost. It was clean, repaired, its windows fixed, its metal gleaming under the sun. And on the door, someone had painted a message in big, uneven but living letters. "The road isn't over yet." Margaret covered her face with her hands. Tears ran down her cheeks without a single word. That phrase said everything. That the journey hadn't been in vain. That there were still souls in this world who hadn't forgotten what it meant to look at another human being with compassion. Arthur stumbled outside, disbelief in his step. The engines died one by one, leaving behind a silence only the wind dared to fill. Cole Maddox stood there beside his bike, helmet hanging from the handlebar, his eyes calm, the look of a man who had done what was right. Arthur approached, hands trembling, and without words, simply reached out. Cole took his hand firmly, not smiling, but with a warmth that needed no language. "No one rides alone on this road."
And so, as the echo of the Harleys faded into the distance, it became clear that some stories aren't born to be told, but to be remembered. If this one rode beside you, if it made you feel the roar of the road and the weight of brotherhood, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to Hell's Road and ride with us into the next forgotten legend of the asphalt. Because as long as there are those who still believe in loyalty, the roar will never fade.